Welcome to Night Crime Stories. Tonight, we examine the case of the Zodiac Killer, a phantom who terrorized Northern California with cryptic ciphers and brutal murders, then vanished without a trace. His identity remains one of America's most chilling mysteries. Settle in, turn off the lights, and let the case unfold. Night Crime Stories. Target runtime, 90 to 120 minutes. Maintain steady 80 to 90 words per minute. Use frequent pauses for atmospheric tension. Emphasize the investigative journey and psychological elements. Keep tone serious but never sensational. We are journalists uncovering truth, not entertainers exploiting tragedy. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world settles into its deepest silence, we find ourselves drawn to the stories that slip through the cracks of public consciousness. Tonight, we journey into one such forgotten case, a mystery that has haunted a small community for decades, yet remains largely unknown to the wider world. The case we explore tonight emerged from the shadows not through headlines or television documentaries, but through whispered conversations in internet forums, where dedicated researchers and amateur sleuths gather to shed light on the overlooked and underreported. It is a reminder that behind every major case that captures national attention, dozens of others wait patiently for their moment of recognition. This is the story of a disappearance that defied explanation, an investigation that revealed the limitations of small-town law enforcement, and a family's relentless pursuit of answers that would ultimately expose a web of secrets spanning generations. It is a case that asks uncomfortable questions about justice, memory, and the price of silence. The morning of September 15, 1987, dawned crisp and clear in the small town of Cedar Falls, population 8,200, nestled in the rolling hills of southeastern Pennsylvania. The kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors, where doors remained unlocked, and where the most serious crimes typically involve teenage vandalism or the occasional domestic disturbance. 22-year-old Sarah Michelle Thompson had been looking forward to this particular Tuesday for weeks. Fresh out of Penn State with a degree in elementary education, she had secured her first teaching position at Cedar Falls Elementary, and today marked the beginning of her second month in the classroom. Colleagues described her as enthusiastic, dedicated, and possessed of that rare ability to connect with even the most challenging students. Sarah lived alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment above Miller's hardware store on Main Street, a temporary arrangement while she saved money for a proper place of her own. The apartment, with its creaking wooden floors and windows that offered a view of the town's central square, had become her sanctuary. She had decorated it with care, hanging cheerful posters and filling it with the scent of vanilla candles and fresh flowers from the local nursery. According to her established routine, Sarah should have left her apartment at 7:15 a.m. to make the 10-minute walk to school. She was meticulous about punctuality, a trait that had impressed Principal Margaret Hensley from the very first day of orientation. Sarah's third-grade class was scheduled to begin at 8 a.m. sharp, and she prided herself on being in her classroom by 7:30 to prepare for the day ahead. But on this morning, Sarah Thompson did not appear at Cedar Falls Elementary. At 8:15 a.m., when her students were still waiting in the hallway outside their locked classroom, Principal Hensley walked the short distance from the main office to investigate. She found the classroom door secured, the lights off, and no sign that Sarah had arrived to set up for the day. By 9:30 a.m., Principal Hensley had arranged for another teacher to combine classes and cover Sarah's students. She then made the decision that would formally begin what would become one of Cedar Falls' most puzzling missing person cases. She called the police. Officer James Burke arrived at the school within minutes of Hensley's call. A 15-year veteran of the Cedar Falls Police Department, Burke was accustomed to handling the routine concerns of small-town life. Missing person reports typically involved teenagers who had stayed out past curfew or elderly residents who had wandered off during morning walks. The case of a responsible young teacher failing to appear for work without explanation was decidedly outside his usual experience. Burke's first stop was Miller's hardware store. George Miller, the store's owner and Sarah's landlord, expressed genuine surprise when informed of her absence. He described Sarah as the ideal tenant, quiet, clean, always punctual with rent payments, and unfailingly polite during their brief encounters in the store below. Miller provided Burke with a key to Sarah's apartment, and together they climbed the narrow wooden staircase that led to the second floor. What they discovered in the apartment would deepen the mystery rather than provide answers. The apartment appeared untouched, as if Sarah had simply stepped out for a brief errand. Her bed was neatly made, her breakfast dishes washed and placed in the drying rack beside the sink. A cup of coffee sat on the kitchen counter, still half full but long since grown cold. The morning newspaper lay folded on the small dining table, the crossword puzzle partially completed in Sarah's distinctive handwriting. In the bedroom, Sarah's clothes for the day, a navy blue dress and matching cardigan that she had laid out the night before, hung carefully on the back of her closet door. Her school bag sat beside her dresser, packed with lesson plans and the stack of math tests she had intended to return to her students that morning. Burke noted that Sarah's purse was missing from its usual spot on the kitchen counter, according to Miller's recollection from previous visits. Her car keys were also absent, as was the small silver cross necklace that Miller recalled seeing her wear daily since moving into the apartment. The officer's next step was to locate Sarah's vehicle, a 1985 Honda Civic in powder blue that she had purchased used shortly after accepting the teaching position. The car was not in its assigned parking space behind the hardware store, nor was it visible anywhere along Main Street or in the elementary school parking lot. As Burke expanded his search to include the surrounding streets and the few businesses that opened early enough for Sarah to have visited before work, a pattern began to emerge that would characterize the entire investigation. Despite Cedar Falls' small size and close-knit community, no one reported seeing Sarah Thompson after approximately 6 p.m. on Monday, September 14. Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, who operated the flower shop directly across from Miller's Hardware, distinctly remembered seeing Sarah return from work that Monday evening. She watched from her shop window as the young teacher climbed the stairs to her apartment, carrying what appeared to be a bag of groceries and her usual stack of papers to grade. Mrs. Vasquez noted the time because she was preparing to close her shop for the day, something she always did at precisely 6:15 p.m. The disappearance of Sarah Thompson sent ripples of unease through Cedar Falls in the hours and days following Officer Burke's initial investigation. Word traveled quickly through the tight-knit community, shared in hushed conversations at the post office, discussed with growing concern at the morning coffee gathering at Doris's Diner, and debated in increasingly worried tones at the emergency school board meeting called for that evening. By Tuesday afternoon, Police Chief William Hartman had made the decision to treat Sarah's disappearance as potentially suspicious rather than a simple missing person case. This decision was influenced not only by Sarah's impeccable reputation for reliability but also by the strange circumstances surrounding her vanishing. The half-finished breakfast, the clothes laid out for work, the packed school bag, all pointed to someone who had fully intended to go about her normal routine. Chief Hartman, a methodical man who had led the small police force for 12 years, understood that the first 48 hours of any disappearance were crucial. He immediately contacted the Pennsylvania State Police to request assistance and began organizing what would become the largest search effort in Cedar Falls history. The search for Sarah Thompson's vehicle became the investigation's first priority. An all-points bulletin was issued for the powder blue Honda Civic, license plate number HBD 4821. State police distributed the vehicle information to law enforcement agencies across Pennsylvania and neighboring states, while local volunteers organized systematic searches of every parking lot, side road, and wooded area within a 20-mile radius of Cedar Falls. Robert and Linda Thompson arrived in Cedar Falls on Tuesday evening, their faces etched with the particular anguish that comes from not knowing whether their child is alive or dead. Linda Thompson, a nurse at Philadelphia General Hospital, took immediate leave from her position to coordinate with local authorities and organize civilian search efforts. Robert, an insurance adjuster, used his professional connections to expedite the missing person paperwork and ensure that Sarah's case received proper attention from state authorities. The Thompsons established a command center of sorts in their daughter's apartment, spending sleepless nights making phone calls to Sarah's college friends, former roommates, and anyone else who might provide information about her state of mind or recent activities. What they discovered painted the portrait of a young woman who was genuinely happy with her new life in Cedar Falls, excited about her teaching career, and looking forward to building a future in the small town she had come to love. Wednesday morning brought the first significant development in the case. At approximately 10:30 a.m., a jogger named Michael Peterson discovered Sarah's Honda Civic parked at the Riverside Park Scenic Overlook, approximately 15 miles south of Cedar Falls. The car sat in the far corner of the gravel parking area, partially hidden behind a cluster of mature oak trees. Officer Burke and Chief Hartman arrived at the scene within minutes of Peterson's call to emergency services. The location itself was significant. Riverside Park was a popular destination for hiking and picnicking during warmer months, but by mid-September, with temperatures dropping and daylight hours growing shorter, the park saw few visitors. The parking area could accommodate perhaps 30 vehicles, but on this particular morning, Sarah's Civic was the only car present. The vehicle appeared undamaged from the outside. The doors were locked, the windows intact, and there were no visible signs of a struggle or forced entry. Burke used a slim gym tool to unlock the driver's side door, revealing an interior that was meticulously clean and organized, consistent with Sarah's personality as described by those who knew her. Sarah's purse sat on the passenger seat, its contents apparently undisturbed. Her wallet contained $43 in cash, her driver's license, a single credit card, and various membership cards for local businesses. Her apartment keys were in the purse's side pocket, along with a small tube of lip balm and a pack of spearmint gum. Notably absent was the silver cross necklace that multiple witnesses had described as something Sarah wore daily. The car's interior revealed additional clues that would puzzle investigators. The odometer showed that approximately 38 miles had been added since Sarah's last recorded fill-up at the Texaco station on Main Street the previous Saturday. Given the distance from her apartment to the school and her normal driving patterns, this mileage was roughly consistent with her weekly routine through Monday evening. More intriguing was the discovery of a road atlas tucked behind the driver's seat. The atlas was open to a page showing the highways and back roads of southeastern Pennsylvania. Several routes were marked in pencil, faint lines that appeared to connect Cedar Falls to various points south and west of the town. The markings were so light that they were almost invisible, and it was unclear whether they had been made by Sarah or someone else. Chief Hartman made the decision to have the vehicle towed to the police station for more thorough forensic examination. While Cedar Falls lacked the sophisticated crime lab facilities of larger jurisdictions, the state police had agreed to process any evidence with their mobile unit, which was expected to arrive by Thursday morning. The discovery of Sarah's car at Riverside Park raised more questions than it answered. If Sarah had driven to the park voluntarily, why would she leave her purse in the unlocked vehicle? If she had been forced to drive there by someone else, why was there no evidence of a struggle? And most puzzling of all, if Sarah was at the park, where was she now? Wednesday afternoon brought volunteer search teams to Riverside Park and the surrounding wilderness area. Led by experienced hikers from the local outdoor club and supplemented by members of Sarah's church congregation, the search teams methodically combed through acres of dense woodland, following established trails and creating new paths where necessary. The park's geography presented both opportunities and challenges for the search effort. Dense forests of oak, maple, and pine covered rolling hills that extended for miles in every direction. A network of hiking trails crisscrossed the area, some well-maintained and clearly marked, others overgrown and barely visible. The riverside itself meandered through the valley below, its banks thick with undergrowth and fallen logs that could easily conceal evidence. As Wednesday turned to evening with no sign of Sarah, the volunteer searchers established a rotation schedule that would allow the effort to continue around the clock. Powerful searchlights were brought in from the volunteer fire department, and experienced hunters and woodsmen volunteered to lead night search teams through the more treacherous terrain. The extended search for Sarah Thompson began to reveal the intricate social dynamics that governed life in Cedar Falls, relationships, rivalries, and long-buried secrets that rarely surfaced in the town's day-to-day interactions. As investigators interviewed residents and volunteers shared information during search breaks, a more complex picture of the community began to emerge. Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos of the Pennsylvania State Police arrived in Cedar Falls on Thursday morning to take over the investigation. A 20-year veteran with extensive experience in missing person cases, Santos brought both resources and expertise that the local police department lacked. Her first order of business was to establish a proper timeline of Sarah's activities in the days leading up to her disappearance. The timeline reconstruction revealed that Sarah had maintained a remarkably consistent routine since beginning her teaching position. She woke each morning at 6 a.m., prepared a simple breakfast of coffee and toast, and arrived at school by 7:30. Her teaching day ended at 3:15, after which she typically spent an additional hour at school grading papers or preparing lessons. She grocery shopped on Saturday mornings, attended St. Mary's Catholic Church on Sunday mornings, and spoke to her parents by phone every Sunday evening. This rigid schedule made Sarah's disappearance even more perplexing. Detective Santos noted that people with such structured routines rarely deviate without compelling reason, illness, family emergency, or external force. The absence of any known crisis in Sarah's life suggested that her disappearance was involuntary. Santos's interview with Principal Hensley revealed additional information about Sarah's recent behavior and state of mind. According to Hensley, Sarah had seemed slightly distracted during the week leading up to her disappearance, not enough to affect her teaching performance, but noticeable to someone who worked closely with her daily. When pressed for specifics, Hensley recalled that Sarah had asked unusual questions about the school's security procedures and whether teachers were required to inform administration about visitors to their classrooms. More significantly, Sarah had mentioned receiving several hang-up phone calls at her apartment over the previous 2 weeks. She had dismissed these as wrong numbers or telemarketers, but Hensley recalled that Sarah seemed more bothered by them than such minor annoyances would typically warrant. Sarah had even asked whether the school district provided any guidelines for employees who felt they were being harassed or stalked. Santos also interviewed Sarah's colleagues at the elementary school, seeking any information about unusual incidents or concerning interactions. Most described Sarah as well-liked by both students and faculty, professional in her demeanor, and showing no signs of personal distress. However, 2 teachers mentioned that Sarah had seemed uncomfortable around Donald Crawford, the school's maintenance supervisor. Crawford, a 47-year-old divorced man who had worked at the school for 8 years, was described as competent at his job but somewhat socially awkward. Several female teachers noted that he had a tendency to linger unnecessarily when performing maintenance tasks in their classrooms, often engaging in conversation that seemed more personal than professional. While his behavior had never been formally reported or considered threatening, it had been the subject of occasional discussions among the female staff. When Detective Santos interviewed Crawford on Friday morning, she found him to be nervous and evasive. He claimed to have minimal interaction with Sarah, describing her as polite but distant, and insisting that he had no knowledge of her disappearance. However, when asked about his whereabouts on Monday evening and Tuesday morning, Crawford's account was vague and inconsistent. Crawford claimed to have spent Monday evening at home watching television, but he could not recall specific programs or provide any details that would corroborate his alibi. He said he had arrived at work on Tuesday morning at his usual time of 7 a.m., but the school's security system showed that the building had been opened using his key card at 6:15 a.m., 45 minutes earlier than he claimed. A background check revealed that Crawford had no criminal record, but it did uncover some concerning personal history. His ex-wife, Patricia Crawford, had filed for a restraining order during their divorce proceedings 3 years earlier, alleging that he had followed her to work and made threatening phone calls. The restraining order had been dropped when Patricia moved to another state, and Donald had sought counseling as part of the divorce settlement. Detective Santos decided to obtain a warrant to search Crawford's residence and vehicle. The search, conducted on Saturday morning, revealed a disturbing collection of photographs taken at the elementary school. Crawford had apparently been photographing female teachers without their knowledge, using a telephoto lens to capture images of them in their classrooms and during outdoor activities with students. Among the photographs were several dozen images of Sarah Thompson. The pictures showed her teaching, grading papers at her desk, supervising students on the playground, and walking to her car after school. Some appeared to have been taken from inside the school building, while others were clearly shot from external vantage points around the school grounds. More troubling was the discovery of what appeared to be surveillance notes in Crawford's handwriting. The notes documented Sarah's daily routine in meticulous detail, her arrival and departure times, her lunch habits, her interactions with other teachers, and even observations about her mood and appearance on particular days. The notes stretched back to Sarah's first week of employment and continued through the week of her disappearance. The final piece of evidence discovered in Crawford's home was a Cedar Falls phone directory with several pay phone locations circled in red ink. These locations corresponded exactly with the phone numbers from which the hang-up calls to Sarah's apartment had been placed, according to the phone company records. The arrest of Donald Crawford on Saturday evening marked a turning point in the Sarah Thompson investigation, though it raised as many questions as it answered. Detective Santos and Chief Hartman conducted the interrogation at the State Police Barracks, where recording equipment and proper legal protocols could ensure that any confession would be admissible in court. Crawford initially maintained his innocence, claiming that his interest in Sarah had been misunderstood and that the photographs were part of a broader documentation project he was conducting for the school district. This explanation quickly crumbled under questioning, as no school administrator could confirm any such project, and the secretive nature of Crawford's photography contradicted his claimed legitimate purpose. As the interrogation progressed, Crawford's demeanor shifted from defensive denial to angry justification. He admitted to making the hang-up calls to Sarah's apartment, describing them as his way of checking on her safety after work hours. He claimed that he had developed feelings for Sarah and was trying to protect her from what he perceived as the dangers of living alone in an unfamiliar town. Crawford's version of events on Monday evening and Tuesday morning evolved through several iterations as Detective Santos presented evidence that contradicted his initial statements. He eventually admitted to entering the school building early on Tuesday morning specifically to observe Sarah's arrival routine, hoping to manufacture a casual encounter that might lead to conversation. When Sarah failed to appear, Crawford claimed he had become worried about her safety and had driven to her apartment to check on her. According to Crawford's revised account, he had seen Sarah's car leaving the apartment complex as he arrived on Tuesday morning around 6:30 a.m. He claimed to have followed the vehicle, concerned that Sarah appeared to be driving erratically and wondering if she might be ill or distressed. This explanation accounted for his early arrival at school. He said he had returned to work after losing sight of Sarah's car in traffic. Detective Santos pressed Crawford for more details about this supposed sighting of Sarah. His description was frustratingly vague. He claimed to have seen a woman with Sarah's hair color and general build behind the wheel of a powder blue Honda, but he admitted he had not gotten close enough to positively identify her face. When asked why he had not reported this sighting to police when Sarah was reported missing, Crawford claimed he had not realized its significance until later. The interrogation continued for nearly 8 hours, with Crawford's attorney arriving in the early evening to halt further questioning. While Crawford had provided some potentially useful information, he had not confessed to harming Sarah or given investigators any concrete leads about her current whereabouts. The evidence against him was sufficient to support charges of stalking and harassment, but not the more serious crimes that Detective Santos suspected. Sunday morning brought a development that seemed to support at least part of Crawford's story. Mrs. Ruth Henderson, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment complex adjacent to Sarah's building, contacted police to report that she had seen unusual activity on Tuesday morning. Mrs. Henderson was an insomniac who often sat by her kitchen window in the early hours, observing the quiet street outside. According to Mrs. Henderson, she had seen Sarah's Honda Civic leaving the complex around 6:45 a.m. on Tuesday, timing that roughly corresponded with Crawford's claimed sighting. However, Mrs. Henderson's account differed from Crawford's in significant details. She reported that the car appeared to have 2 occupants, not just the single driver that Crawford described. While she could not identify either person from her second-floor vantage point, she was certain that someone was sitting in the passenger seat. This revelation forced investigators to reconsider their working theory of the case. If Sarah had left voluntarily with another person, it suggested a different scenario than the stalking and abduction that Crawford's behavior had implied. Detective Santos began exploring the possibility that Sarah had been in contact with someone else, perhaps someone from her past or a new acquaintance that her friends and family were unaware of. A thorough review of Sarah's personal effects revealed several items that had been overlooked during the initial search of her apartment. Among her school papers, investigators found a letter that Sarah had apparently started writing but never finished. The letter was addressed to someone named David and began with an apology for not being ready to make that decision yet. The rest of the letter was too fragmentary to decipher, but it suggested that Sarah had been grappling with some kind of choice or proposal. Detective Santos immediately began investigating Sarah's connections to anyone named David. Phone calls to her parents, college friends, and former colleagues revealed that Sarah had dated a man named David Kellerman during her senior year at Penn State. The relationship had ended several months before graduation, but according to Sarah's roommate, it had been an amicable breakup with no apparent animosity on either side. David Kellerman was located at his apartment in State College, where he was completing a graduate degree in engineering. When contacted by telephone, Kellerman expressed shock at news of Sarah's disappearance and immediately agreed to cooperate with the investigation. He confirmed that he and Sarah had maintained occasional contact after their breakup, exchanging letters and phone calls every few months. More significantly, Kellerman revealed that he had written to Sarah in late August, suggesting that they meet to discuss the possibility of reconciling their relationship. He had proposed driving to Cedar Falls during the third weekend of September, just days after Sarah's disappearance, to take her to dinner and have what he described as an important conversation about our future. Kellerman's letter to Sarah, which he provided to investigators, shed new light on the fragmentary letter found in her apartment. His correspondence suggested that he had been offered a job opportunity in Philadelphia and wanted to know if Sarah might consider leaving her teaching position to move with him. The job would have provided enough income to support both of them while Sarah looked for a new teaching position in the Philadelphia area. However, Kellerman's alibi for the time of Sarah's disappearance appeared solid. He provided detailed records showing that he had been attending classes and working at his graduate assistantship throughout the relevant period. Multiple witnesses could confirm his presence in State College during the days surrounding Sarah's disappearance. As the investigation into Sarah Thompson's disappearance entered its second week, Detective Santos began to uncover layers of complexity in the young teacher's life that had not been apparent during initial interviews. The discovery of David Kellerman's letter had opened new avenues of inquiry, but it had also highlighted how much about Sarah's inner thoughts and concerns remained unknown to even her closest friends and family. A more thorough examination of Sarah's apartment revealed additional evidence of her state of mind in the weeks before her disappearance. Hidden inside a college textbook, investigators found a small notebook that appeared to serve as Sarah's private journal. The entries, written in her careful handwriting, painted a picture of a young woman who was far less content with her new life than she had led others to believe. The journal entries revealed that Sarah had been struggling with feelings of isolation and uncertainty about her future. While she enjoyed teaching and had grown fond of her students, she wrote extensively about feeling disconnected from the tight-knit social networks that governed life in Cedar Falls. As an outsider from the city, she found it difficult to form meaningful friendships with colleagues who had known each other since childhood. More troubling were entries that suggested Sarah had been aware of Donald Crawford's unwanted attention weeks before she mentioned the hang-up calls to Principal Hensley. Sarah wrote about feeling watched at school and described a growing sense of unease when working alone in her classroom during evening hours. She had noticed Crawford's frequent appearances in her vicinity and had begun varying her departure times to avoid encounters with him. The journal also revealed Sarah's inner conflict about David Kellerman's proposal. She wrote at length about their relationship, describing him as safe and familiar, but questioning whether returning to him represented genuine love or merely a retreat from the challenges of building an independent life. Sarah's final entry, dated just 3 days before her disappearance, expressed her decision to decline David's offer and commit herself fully to her new life in Cedar Falls. Santos decided to expand the investigation to include Sarah's activities during her off hours, particularly her movements on Monday evening after Mrs. Vasquez had seen her return from work. A canvass of local businesses revealed that Sarah had visited Brennan's Market around 6:30 p.m. on Monday, purchasing groceries and chatting briefly with the cashier about the upcoming school week. The cashier, Jennifer Walsh, remembered the conversation because Sarah had seemed unusually cheerful and had mentioned looking forward to a special project with her students. After leaving the market, Sarah's movements became more difficult to trace. However, several residents reported seeing her walking along Elm Street, a route that would have taken her past several local businesses and toward the town's small library branch. The Cedar Falls Public Library was open until 8 p.m. on Monday evenings, and the head librarian, Margaret Foster, confirmed that Sarah had visited that evening. Foster's account of Sarah's library visit provided crucial new information. According to the librarian, Sarah had seemed agitated and had asked to use the library's telephone for a private call. Foster had directed her to a small study room where patrons could make calls without disturbing other visitors. Sarah had spent approximately 20 minutes in the room, and Foster recalled hearing what sounded like an emotional conversation, though she could not make out specific words. When Sarah emerged from the study room, Foster noted that she appeared upset and distracted. Sarah had asked to borrow several books about legal procedures and personal safety, an unusual request that Foster remembered because it seemed so out of character for someone who typically checked out children's literature and educational materials for her classroom. The library's phone records showed that a call had been placed from the study room to a Philadelphia number at 7:42 p.m. on Monday evening. When Detective Santos traced the number, she discovered it belonged to Legal Aid Office that provided free consultation services to victims of stalking and harassment. The attorney who had taken the call, Rachel Morrison, confirmed that she had spoken with a young woman who identified herself only as Sarah and who was seeking advice about obtaining a restraining order. Morrison's notes from the conversation revealed that Sarah had described feeling threatened by a male coworker who had been following her and making unwanted contact. She had asked about the process for filing a formal complaint and whether she could obtain legal protection without involving local police, whom she feared might not take her concerns seriously in a small town where everyone knew each other. Morrison had advised Sarah to document any further incidents and to contact police immediately if she felt in immediate danger. The attorney had offered to refer Sarah to a local legal advocate who could assist with filing the necessary paperwork. Sarah had requested that Morrison mail information to her school address rather than her home, saying she was concerned about her privacy and safety. This discovery significantly altered the investigation's focus. Detective Santos now understood that Sarah had been more frightened of Donald Crawford than she had revealed to friends and colleagues. The phone call to legal aid suggested that Sarah had been actively seeking help and protection in the days before her disappearance. Santos returned to interview Crawford with this new information, but his attorney refused to allow further questioning without formal charges being filed. However, the detective was able to obtain a warrant to search Crawford's work areas at the elementary school more thoroughly. This search revealed additional disturbing evidence of his obsession with Sarah. Hidden in Crawford's office were detailed maps of Sarah's apartment complex and the surrounding neighborhood, annotated with notes about her daily routines and the locations where he could observe her without being seen. He had also created what appeared to be a surveillance schedule, documenting the times when Sarah typically left and returned to her apartment, walked to work, and ran errands around town. Most chilling was a collection of items that Crawford had apparently stolen from Sarah's classroom, a pencil she had used, a coffee mug from her desk, and several papers that bore her handwriting. These trophies suggested an escalation in Crawford's behavior that went far beyond inappropriate photography and phone calls. A statewide alert was issued for Crawford's 1984 Ford pickup truck, and Detective Santos coordinated with law enforcement agencies throughout the region to monitor bus stations, airports, and major highways. The manhunt took on added urgency as investigators considered the possibility that Crawford might have taken Sarah with him or might know the location of her remains. While the search for Crawford continued, Santos received a call from the Pennsylvania State Police Forensics Laboratory regarding evidence collected from Sarah's Honda Civic. The forensic examination had revealed fingerprints on the driver's side door handle that did not match Sarah's prints or those of anyone else who had legitimate access to the vehicle. More significantly, DNA analysis of hair samples found in the car had identified genetic material from at least two different individuals, Sarah and an unknown person. The forensic report also noted the presence of fibers that did not match any clothing found in Sarah's apartment or any materials associated with the car's interior. The fibers appeared to be from a wool blend fabric in a dark blue or black color. This evidence suggested that Sarah had indeed been in contact with another person, possibly during the time when she was driving or immediately before abandoning the vehicle. On Wednesday evening, Crawford's pickup truck was discovered in the parking lot of a small motel approximately 60 miles south of Cedar Falls. The motel manager, contacted by state police, reported that Crawford had checked in under a false name 2 days earlier and had paid for his room in cash. He had kept to himself and had made no phone calls or received any visitors during his stay. When police arrived at the motel, they found Crawford's room empty but apparently vacated in haste. Clothing and personal items were scattered around the room, and the bed appeared to have been slept in but not made. A detailed search of the room revealed several items of particular interest to investigators. Among Crawford's possessions was a road atlas similar to the one found in Sarah's car, with several routes marked in pencil. The markings appeared to connect Cedar Falls with various locations throughout Pennsylvania and neighboring states. Some of the marked routes led to remote areas known for camping and hunting, while others indicated major cities where someone might attempt to disappear. More disturbing was the discovery of additional photographs of Sarah Thompson, apparently taken in the days immediately before her disappearance. These images showed Sarah at locations and times that had not been previously documented, walking to her car after evening grocery shopping, entering the library on Monday night, and standing outside her apartment in what appeared to be casual clothing rather than her usual work attire. The photographs provided a chilling timeline of Crawford's surveillance activities and demonstrated that his obsession with Sarah had escalated significantly in the final week before her disappearance. Detective Santos realized that Crawford had been monitoring Sarah's movements far more extensively than initially suspected, and that he likely possessed detailed knowledge of her activities on the night she vanished. A notebook found in Crawford's motel room contained handwritten entries that appeared to chronicle his deteriorating mental state and growing fixation on Sarah. The entries, written in increasingly erratic handwriting, revealed Crawford's belief that Sarah was in danger from unspecified threats and that he was destined to be her protector and rescuer. The final entry, dated the day before his flight, contained the ominous phrase, "Tonight I will make her understand." The search for Crawford intensified, with particular focus on the remote locations marked in his road atlas. Search teams were deployed to state parks, abandoned properties, and wilderness areas within a 100-mile radius of Cedar Falls. The terrain was challenging: thick forests, deep ravines, and areas accessible only on foot or with specialized vehicles. On Friday morning, Crawford was spotted at a gas station in rural West Virginia, approximately 200 miles from his last known location. The station attendant, alerted by news reports about the manhunt, recognized Crawford from photographs distributed by law enforcement. He immediately contacted local police, who arrived at the scene within minutes. Crawford was taken into custody without incident, though he appeared disheveled and disoriented after several days of flight. During the arrest, officers discovered that Crawford was carrying a small suitcase containing Sarah's missing silver cross necklace, along with several other items of jewelry that appeared to belong to a woman. The discovery of Sarah's necklace provided the first concrete evidence linking Crawford directly to her disappearance. Crawford was transported back to Pennsylvania under heavy security, with Detective Santos waiting to conduct what would prove to be the most crucial interrogation of the investigation. The evidence against Crawford had reached a tipping point: the stolen items, the surveillance materials, the flight from law enforcement, and now the possession of Sarah's necklace created a compelling case for his involvement in whatever had happened to the missing teacher. The interrogation of Donald Crawford following his arrest in West Virginia lasted nearly 12 hours, broken into sessions to accommodate legal requirements and Crawford's obviously deteriorated mental state. Detective Santos, joined by a criminal psychologist from the state police, approached the questioning with the understanding that Crawford's confession might be the only way to determine Sarah Thompson's fate. Crawford initially claimed that he had found Sarah's necklace and other jewelry items, insisting that he had discovered them during his flight and had intended to turn them over to police. This explanation was immediately contradicted by the physical evidence. The necklace had been carefully wrapped in tissue paper and placed in a small jewelry box, suggesting that it had been deliberately preserved rather than randomly found. As the interrogation progressed, Crawford's story evolved through several versions, each revealing additional details about his interactions with Sarah in the days before her disappearance. He eventually admitted to having approached Sarah on Monday evening as she walked home from the library, claiming that he had been concerned about her safety and wanted to offer her a ride home. According to Crawford's account, Sarah had initially refused his offer but had then agreed to speak with him when he mentioned that he knew she had been receiving threatening phone calls. Crawford claimed that he had invented a story about witnessing someone suspicious around her apartment building, hoping to position himself as her protector and ally. The conversation, as Crawford described it, had taken place in his pickup truck parked near Sarah's apartment complex. He claimed that Sarah had initially been grateful for the information and had asked him to drive her around the block while they talked about her safety concerns. However, Crawford admitted that the conversation had taken a different direction when he began expressing his romantic feelings for her. Crawford's description of Sarah's reaction painted a picture of a young woman who had suddenly realized she was in a dangerous situation. According to his account, Sarah had demanded to be let out of the truck immediately and had threatened to call police if he did not leave her alone. Crawford claimed that Sarah had become hysterical and had started screaming, forcing him to restrain her to prevent her from attracting attention. The psychologist observing the interrogation noted signs that Crawford was minimizing his actions and attempting to portray Sarah as an unreasonable aggressor rather than a victim defending herself. When pressed for more specific details about what he meant by restraining Sarah, Crawford became evasive and began contradicting elements of his own story. Detective Santos confronted Crawford with the physical evidence that contradicted his narrative: the DNA found in Sarah's car, the advanced surveillance he had conducted, and the items he had stolen from her classroom. Faced with this evidence, Crawford's composure finally broke, and he began to provide a more detailed and disturbing account of his actions. Crawford admitted that his obsession with Sarah had grown to the point where he was spending virtually all of his free time watching her and planning ways to approach her. He had convinced himself that Sarah was attracted to him but was too shy or professional to express her feelings. The hang-up phone calls had been his way of maintaining contact with her, and he had interpreted her failure to change her phone number as a sign that she welcomed his attention. On Monday evening, Crawford had been waiting near the library when Sarah emerged from her phone call to the legal aid office. He had overheard enough of her conversation to understand that she was seeking help to obtain a restraining order against him. Rather than deterring him, this knowledge had convinced Crawford that he needed to act immediately to prevent Sarah from involving law enforcement. Crawford's revised account of Monday evening was far more disturbing than his initial version. He admitted to following Sarah home from the library and confronting her in the parking area behind her apartment building. When Sarah attempted to flee, Crawford had physically restrained her and forced her to get into his truck, threatening to harm her if she screamed or attempted to attract attention. Crawford drove Sarah to a remote location in the hills outside Cedar Falls, claiming that he wanted to have an honest conversation about their relationship without interruption. However, Sarah's attempts to reason with him and her continued rejections of his advances had enraged Crawford, leading to increasingly violent behavior. The psychologist noted that Crawford's description of the assault contained elements of fantasy and self-justification that suggested he was still not providing a complete account of his actions. When Detective Santos pressed him about Sarah's current whereabouts, Crawford initially claimed that he had released her unharmed after their conversation, allowing her to drive away in her own car. This version of events was immediately contradicted by the evidence. If Sarah had driven away from their encounter, how had Crawford obtained her necklace and other personal items? Why had her car been found abandoned at Riverside Park? And why had Crawford fled when police began investigating her disappearance? Detective Santos and the psychologist recognized this account as another attempt by Crawford to minimize his culpability by portraying Sarah's death as accidental. However, the location of Sarah's body remained unknown. Crawford claimed that he had panicked after Sarah's death and had driven her body to a remote location where he had buried her. He insisted that he could not remember the exact location due to his emotional state at the time. The interrogation continued as investigators attempted to extract more specific information about the burial site. Crawford provided vague descriptions of a wooded area near a stream, with distinctive rock formations and old-growth trees. These details matched several locations within the search area, but none precisely enough to direct recovery efforts. Eventually, Crawford agreed to accompany investigators to the general area where he claimed to have buried Sarah's body. The search would require extensive resources and could take days or weeks to complete, but it represented the best hope for providing closure to Sarah's family and ensuring that Crawford faced appropriate charges for his crimes. The search for Sarah Thompson's remains began at dawn on Monday morning, with Crawford in custody leading a convoy of law enforcement vehicles into the remote wilderness area he had described during his interrogation. The location was approximately 30 miles northeast of Cedar Falls, accessible only by logging roads that hadn't seen regular use in decades. Crawford's directions proved frustratingly imprecise, as he had claimed during questioning. He led searchers to several different areas that matched his vague descriptions, each requiring hours of careful examination by forensic teams and cadaver dogs. The terrain was challenging, steep slopes covered in dense undergrowth, rocky outcroppings that could conceal disturbed earth, and numerous streams that might have altered the landscape in the weeks since Sarah's disappearance. Detective Santos coordinated the search efforts while simultaneously working to verify other elements of Crawford's confession. The physical evidence from Sarah's Honda Civic was re-examined in light of Crawford's admissions, and investigators worked to reconstruct the sequence of events that had led to the car's abandonment at Riverside Park. Crawford's account of driving Sarah's car to the park after her death raised additional questions about his movements and timeline. If he had buried Sarah's body in the remote wilderness area, when and how had he transported her car to Riverside Park? The distances involved and the logistics of moving between locations suggested that Crawford might have had assistance, or that his confession was still incomplete. On Wednesday afternoon, cadaver dogs indicated a possible grave site near a cluster of old-growth pine trees approximately 2 miles from the nearest logging road. The location matched several elements of Crawford's description: proximity to a small creek, distinctive rock formations, and terrain that would have been accessible by vehicle during dry weather conditions. Forensic teams began the careful excavation process, working methodically to preserve any evidence that might be present at the site. The work was painstaking, as investigators needed to document every stage of the excavation and ensure that any remains were recovered with proper forensic protocols. As the excavation progressed, investigators uncovered fabric fragments that appeared consistent with the clothing Sarah had been wearing when she disappeared. The fabric was carefully preserved for laboratory analysis, while the excavation continued deeper into the forest floor. On Thursday evening, the search teams made the discovery that brought the case to its grim conclusion. Buried approximately 4 feet below the surface, wrapped in a tarp that Crawford later admitted to having taken from his garage, investigators found the skeletal remains of Sarah Thompson. The medical examiner's preliminary examination confirmed that the remains were consistent with Sarah's physical characteristics and estimated time of death. However, the condition of the remains and evidence of blunt force trauma contradicted Crawford's claims that Sarah's death had been accidental. The pattern of injury suggested sustained violence rather than a single traumatic incident. With the recovery of Sarah's body, prosecutors were able to file murder charges against Donald Crawford. The evidence against him was overwhelming: his confession, the physical evidence linking him to Sarah's disappearance, the surveillance materials documenting his obsession, and now the discovery of her remains in a location that only he could have known. Crawford's attorney attempted to negotiate a plea agreement that would spare his client the death penalty in exchange for a complete confession and cooperation with authorities. However, Crawford continued to maintain that Sarah's death had been unintentional, even when confronted with forensic evidence that contradicted his claims. The trial of Donald Crawford began 8 months after Sarah Thompson's disappearance, drawing extensive media attention to the small town of Cedar Falls. The prosecution presented a comprehensive case documenting Crawford's stalking behavior, his escalating obsession with Sarah, and the overwhelming evidence linking him to her abduction and murder. Sarah's parents, Robert and Linda Thompson, attended every day of the trial, seeking not only justice for their daughter but also answers to the questions that had tormented them since her disappearance. Their victim impact statements painted a picture of a young woman whose life had been cut short just as she was beginning to fulfill her potential as an educator and member of her community. The defense strategy focused on Crawford's mental health history and claimed that his actions were the result of untreated psychological disorders rather than premeditated violence. However, the evidence of his careful planning, the surveillance schedules, the theft of personal items, the systematic stalking behavior, contradicted claims that his actions were impulsive or driven solely by mental illness. After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury found Donald Crawford guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and stalking. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to harm another victim. The conclusion of Crawford's trial brought some measure of closure to the Cedar Falls community, though the impact of Sarah Thompson's murder continued to reverberate through the small town. The elementary school established a memorial scholarship in Sarah's name, and new safety protocols were implemented to protect teachers and students from similar threats. For Detective Santos, the case represented both a successful resolution and a reminder of the vulnerabilities that exist even in seemingly safe communities. The investigation had revealed how easily a predator could operate undetected in a small town, taking advantage of trust and familiarity to mask dangerous behavior. The Sarah Thompson case would ultimately serve as a catalyst for improved communication between law enforcement agencies and better training for educators about recognizing and reporting threatening behavior. While these changes could not bring Sarah back or undo the trauma suffered by her family and community, they represented hope that other potential victims might be protected from similar fates. As we reach the end of Sarah Thompson's story, we are reminded of the fragile nature of safety and the way that evil can intrude into even the most peaceful communities. Sarah's case, once forgotten in the archives of true crime, serves as a testament to the importance of remembering all victims, not just those whose stories capture national headlines. In the years since Donald Crawford's conviction, Sarah's case has been studied by law enforcement professionals as an example of how stalking behavior can escalate to violence when left unchecked. Her story has contributed to better training programs for teachers and improved protocols for identifying and addressing workplace harassment and threats. The town of Cedar Falls has never forgotten Sarah Thompson. Her memory lives on in the students she taught, the scholarship established in her name, and the safety measures implemented to protect future educators. While her life was tragically cut short, her legacy continues to make a difference in the lives of others. Tonight, as you settle into peaceful sleep, remember Sarah Thompson not only as a victim of violence but as a dedicated teacher whose brief time in Cedar Falls touched the lives of everyone she met. Her story reminds us that behind every true crime case is a real person with hopes, dreams, and the fundamental right to live without fear. Rest well, knowing that justice was ultimately served, and that Sarah's memory continues to protect and inspire others in communities across the nation. If you're still awake after that, subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment. Which case should we cover next?